Distinguished Alumni Award was established in 1997 to pay special tribute to alumni of the Dwight School, the Englewood School for Boys, and the Dwight-Englewood School. The award is presented for exemplary professional and/or volunteer accomplishments. This award honors alumni whose achievements deserve special recognition by the school and by fellow graduates. And to start us off, I would like to invite to the podium Michael Holtzman from the Englewood School for Boys class of 1969. Let's hear a little cheer. Come on, you're in there. And he will present the very first Distinguished Alumni Award. Michael.
Hello. I was honored and intimidated introducing Peter Balakian for a Distinguished Alumni Award in our class of 1969. I appreciate the opportunity to share this joyous day with Mrs. Balakian, his mom, and their family. Well, I knew some things about Peter's published writing. Picture opening your email from a dear friend saying, "I've won the Pulitzer Prize and just wanted you to know." The 2016 Pulitzer Board said it awarded Peter the Pulitzer for Poetry that, quote, bears witness to the old losses and triages that undergird a worldwide age of danger and uncertainty, and that we are reminded that the history of atrocity, trauma, and forgetting is both global and ancient, but we are reminded, too, of the hardy richness of culture and the resilience of love, they said of Peter's collection, Ozone Journey. The Armenian Genocide of 1915, which appealed to its origins born from mysterious encoded messages of his maternal grandmother, Nafina Arusian, that years later compelled him to uncover her survival through the Syrian desert with 2 infant daughters in a period when 1.5 million perished, has been a life's work for Peter. Before sharing personal connections, I'd like us now to show how proud and thrilled we are for Peter and his accomplishments that include the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. After teaching at Dwight-Englewood for 2 years, Peter has been a professor at Colgate since 1980, teaching American literature, creative writing, and genocide studies. And during the time, he's authored more than a dozen books of poems, prose, and translations that have earned many awards, highlighted in your Alumni Awards program. The literary critic, Katja Taloyan, described Peter's contribution to American literature with a connection for us here. Quote, "In all that complexity, there is always and still an American poet sitting on the Palisades, looking at the Hudson and the towers, and an Armenian poet looking at the Euphrates and Tigris, the rivers of genocide." I've looked at mementos of the friendships I've had with Peter over some 54 years, with a person who has always pursued his passions while encouraging others to be part of them. Peter and I had instant connections in the early ESP years with Mantle and Maris and the Yankees. In his 1997 memoir, Black Dog of Fate, Peter recounts as a youngster in 1962, he saw his grandmother, who avidly followed the Yankees, right after they beat the Giants 1-0 to win the World Series. After McCovey had lined out to second with 2 runners on, he recalled her tender greeting to him. Good old Richardson. When I read that, I immediately thought of being in Hebrew school at Temple Emmanuel in Englewood, hearing on the radio the crack of the bat, and how glad I was that Bobby Richardson caught it for the last out, like his grandmother alluded to. Memorable times we had together included what will be the 50th anniversary this summer of Woodstock, when Peter and I and 2 good friends trucked off to Yasker's farm, the rain and mud pouring through our tents amidst a sea of young people. Peter out of the blue would quote Bob Dylan, such as among high school friends, in a college letter I had, and in his 2015 literary essays book, where a New York bar challenge included his reciting all 20 stanzas that began, "Darkness at the break of noon, and it's all right, Mom." I believe it's a piece of poetic destiny that also in 2016, Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize for Literature, quote, for having created new poetic expression. Peter's precision with detail helped set up our meetings as college juniors in Athens, Greece, at noontime in front of the American Express, when at 10 minutes after the hour I distinctly heard, "Holtz," and off we were, travel friends by boat for Crete, hiking the primitive paradise of Samaria Gorge. College visits included watching at his Bucknell apartment senior year when the Knicks whipped the Lakers for a title the last time. Hearing how Allen Ginsberg stayed at that same apartment. Poetry was a staple of Peter's life, even then. I remember at ESB, Peter's thirst for learning included writing on the inside paper book covers words he didn't know in their meanings, which some of us emulated. We saw Peter's late father, a family doctor, invented Sport Aid after he told football coach Dick Cicala water and oranges wouldn't suffice to prevent cramping and dehydration. Later in the fall of '68, Peter scored on a unique final play for the comeback win, leading the football team he and John Troshafian captained to an unprecedented, undefeated season with Sport Aid as the energy drink of choice. In the winter 2016 issue of DE Today, they interviewed Peter after he won the Pulitzer Prize that April. It traced his ascent as a poet and teacher to his first days at ESP and his initial rebellion to attend the school Dr. Balakian insisted on. Peter's laser-like observation and retention were captured in this excerpt from Black Dog of Fate as DE Today retold it. I walked to a Victorian clapboard building and knocked on the headmaster's door. "Sir," I had already learned some private school manners, "my name is Peter Balakian." "I know who you are," the headmaster said. He was a plain, dry-faced man with tan-rimmed glasses whose look of piety reminded me of a Protestant minister's. Yet, in his Madrid sport jacket, white shirt, and thin red tie, his sandy-colored hair parted neatly, he was a modern version of Mr. Chips. How many of us ESB graduates would have had the memory and literary powers to describe Dr. Roger Cooley that way more than 30 years later? Peter, you have shown how a liberal education can be applied to some of the profound questions of our time through your writing and teaching. We toast you today at Dwight-Englewood.
I have to look at myself, right? I will have an obstacle to face that I can't overcome. Holtz, thank you with gratitude from a deep place and for our friendship of more than a half a century. These things are hard to put in words. I want to say some thank yous. Maria Sanchez, Gardner, wherever you are, you've been amazing. What you do is just at the core of creating community for the whole school, and enormous gratitude. And to the whole alumni planning committee, Headmaster Rodney DeJarnay, thank you for your presiding and for all the amazing growth and development that's happened under your leadership. Bill Yaffa, Lynn Lieblich, you've been amazing too. Gosh, we've been in touch for, I don't know, almost a year, and you have just made so much happen to make this happen. Very happy to be with classmates. Obviously, an amazingly special moment to be here with my family. My mother was there at my graduation 50 years ago, and here she is. All right. To have my sister Pam, my sister Jen, my brother Jim, my nieces Allie and Catherine. What a mitzvah, to put it in Armenian. And let me say too, this minute doesn't count toward the minutes I have in my talk. So let me say, it was really a special session last night with Doris Gilman, an amazing presence at this school for so many years. And a colleague of mine for the years I taught here, 74 to 76, and just thinking that after a beautiful dinner with classmates reunion, we had a kind of seminar session in which Doris spoke, reflected, and people gathered around a table to talk more. And again, to add to that, this afternoon's memorial session for our departed classmates, reflections, singing, a kind of community adhesiveness. It's very special and it's not usual. I mean, only a special institution of learning can make that kind of care, thoughtfulness, and community happen. So I feel very, very grateful that DE is what it is. We did remember our departed classmates earlier today, Wayne Cipolla, Wayne Drazel, and Jeff Overton, my classmates and friends. I know I've recorded my personal reflections about them in the memory book that Lynn and Bill have compiled. And I want to express my congratulations to the honorees, Jennifer and of course Anthony and of course Jane. Thank you for being here together with me. I do want to say something about Anthony Bourdain because I followed his work really closely, and I am a great admirer of his work as writer, journalist, and creator of an original form that was both scenic and linguistic. His voice was edgy, satiric, full of wit and play and humor, and deadly serious. He was a true prober of human experience and the rich spirit and meaning of culture and cooking and food. I didn't know him, but I was in touch with him a few times in recent years about doing a show on Armenia, which in the end he did. It was one of the final shows he did, and it was a beautiful segment, and it meant a great deal to many viewers around the world. We're all grateful for his extraordinary work. All right, now I'm officially starting. My reflection in three parts. One, I owe a lot to ESB. I owe a lot to Dwight-Englewood. At ESB, I began my life as a liberal arts student. I was educated in a curriculum that emphasized critical thinking, exegetical analysis, and writing, lots of writing. At Dwight-Englewood, when I returned 5 years later, I began my life as a teacher. In Leggett Hall, in room 201, I met all my classes. I began that process of conversation, listening, professing, interacting with students. I loved it then, I love it now, 45 years later. The experience in room 201 told me to keep going. It helped to change my life. My great friend, the marvelous poet Bruce Smith, my DE English department colleague and still poet comrade, and I started a national poetry journal here at DE during those years, and we named it Graham House Review after the historic stone house on campus at 81 Lincoln Street where I lived then. Memory may be the deepest part of consciousness, What thou lovest well remains, the rest is dross, Ezra Pound wrote. My reply to Pound is, I'm not sure the rest is dross. It may be much worse. I'm sure all of you, like me, remember sense, memory, teenage complexity, and high school days. We remember many intimate scenes, not only the image, but the feeling, emotion, heart-pumping part. We can have an interesting conversation with ourselves if we meditate on how our 67-year-old selves might greet our 17-year-old selves. What thou lovest well remains. But I feel the kiss of luck on my cheek when I think of growing up here in Bergen County. For me in Teaneck till I was 9 and then Tenafly with the hook into Englewood through ESB. Because if your childhood memories were those of barbed wire at Auschwitz or piles of corpses along the road out of Kigali, or nights in the African-American ghettos in Chicago or Watts or Newark, you may not have good memories of your youth. We all know that people who go through great pain when they are kids and teenagers carry around trauma like a huge boulder through life. Mostly we were lucky, though I know some of my classmates had traumatic things going on in their families and they endured a lot of pain. In my family, we were lucky. We had a lot of love and support and normalcy. The trauma of the Armenian genocide had preceded us, and we would figure out later how to ingest it from our sunny suburban vantages. For the most part, history treated us well. We who grew up in Bergen County in the 1950s and 60s and attended this privileged school. The lawns were green, the supermarkets were super, the gas stations pumped fuel into our family cars, Cousin Brucey whizzed us the top 40 every day, and our teachers came to work every day with passion for education. And Bergen County in northeast New Jersey was and is an incredible culture zone. Its ethnic diversity is extraordinary, from Patterson to Passaic to Hackensack to Englewood to the great hub of Newark. We grew up in this suburban metropolitan culture zone where the impact of New York was large, but not occluding Jersey's uniqueness. Our county was home to a lot of talent. Novelists, journalists, poets, actors, TV and radio celebrities, jazz and rock stars, professional athletes, politicians, inventors. Even if it was an unconscious backdrop to our coming of age, it inflected our sense of dynamism and possibility. Everywhere there were people in our landscape who were making things happen on a national or world stage. And there was also poverty, racism, suffering everywhere. And that too hit me more and more as I navigated my last years in high school. And it was, and Doris noted this last night, an epic decade we came of age in. One of national trauma, turmoil, violence, and also exciting change and hope. The assassination of our liberal visionary leaders, JFK, RFK, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, the Vietnam War misguided disaster, the legal but violent dismantling of Jim Crow, LBJ's Great Society, Medicare, and civil rights, the birth of a national human rights culture, the second wave of feminism, dynamic breakthroughs in literature, the visual arts, film, and music. The explosion of that historical moment continues to play out for all of us. 2, I want to take a moment, and Michael so generously reflected on my dad for a second too. I want to take a moment to reflect on my father, Gerard, Jerry, Dr. Balakian, however you knew him. because he was the reason I came to ESB. I fought him as hard as a 14-year-old could in 1965. There are some more scenes to add to the one Mike read in my memoir, because I wanted to stay in Tenafly with my friends and my sports culture. I lost that battle, and I'm glad I did. My father saw in ESB an educational model of more intimate learning, deeper mentoring, and a more liberal arts curriculum. And he also saw that I was in trouble in other ways. That's another story. I mean, juvenile court was okay for a couple of days. That is another story. He was right on all counts. ESB helped me in more ways than I knew then, although I knew it then too. ESB liberal arts education would send me on to my life's calling as a writer and a teacher, and much gratitude to my excellent ESB teachers and coaches. Carl Zimmerman, Bob Gordon, Hal Dalmay, Claude Robinson, Lenny Prouty, Mike Heckmer, Dick Sakala, Dick Overton, Elmer Ripley, Lou Scarzello, Steve Waters, Headmaster Roger Cooley, and other legendaries of those days. I didn't have them, but Malcolm Duffy, Butler Beaumont, Fred Hutchins, to name a few. My father was greatly involved with ESB. He was the head of the parents board in 68 and 69. He was the team physician for the football team in 67 and 68. And the undefeated season of 68, the last one the school has had. It's almost like the Knicks with New York. It was a source of great pride and joy for me and for him. I want to remember the players on that amazing team from our class. John Sarshafian, my co-captain, Coley Brown, who is here today, Chris Pisani, who did throw the best spiral in Bergen County, and I'm not exaggerating, Wayne Cipolla, and Dave Schwepp. As many of you know, my dad invented the electrolyte beverage concept in the summer of 1965. He became a pioneer of the new field of sports medicine. His product, Sport Aid, was the leading product in this new arena until it was superseded by that other product, whose name we won't mention. My father credited ESB for allowing him to test Sport Aid on our football, soccer, wrestling, and cross. When a feature article was written by James Lynch, the father of my friend and a great ESB athlete, Dean Lynch, ran in the Sunday New York Times in October of '67 on Sport Aid, the photographs were taken of my dad and me and my teammate John Vida on Solomon Field, where we played our games then. Shortly after my father established the Sport Aid Scholarship at ESB and then at DE for an athlete of high achievement in his junior year. My sister Pam graduated from Dwight in '72, and her closest friends remain from those great years of her life. My nephew Nicky is currently a very happy DE student, and so my family ties to the school are and remain deep. 3. I want to close my remarks by thinking about the state of education in our nation from the vantage place of someone who has always lived in the privileged worlds of private education. ESB, Bucknell, Dwight-Englewood, Brown, and Colgate. What spots those have been for me, what good luck. Liberal arts education is a cornerstone of democracy. We cannot survive without it. Without it, we would be Saudi Arabia, North Korea, Turkey, China. Liberal arts education is equipment for living, to riff on Kenneth Burke, the great literary critic. It's a complex process of critical and disciplined thinking and creative imagination through which we begin to figure out how to live and how to be part of a democratic society. We're living in a time when education, and more broadly liberal arts education, its values and roots are under attack. And we need to acknowledge this and respond. We need to be witnessing citizens. We are subjected to a president who attacks journalists as the enemy of the people, the authentic media as fake news. Journalists are some of our most courageous liberal arts practitioners whose research and critical thinking keep democracy going. Since Trump, according to Reporters Without Borders, the U.S. has dropped in rank on the World Press Freedom Index. This was unimaginable 4 years ago. We are subjected to a president and his enablers and cohorts who display contempt for knowledge-producing institutions, contempt for facts and science, assaults on climate science for one, which endangers the safety of the nation and the planet, the decimation of the EPA, efforts to ban and regulate language at the EPA, DOC, and CDC are significant acts against intellectual freedom. We who've come from privileged institutions like Dwight-Englewood have been part of a unique, humane learning community. We've lived on campuses of beauty, amenities, and resources. And yet today, we're living in a broader national culture where state funding for our major public institutions continue to be cut in ways that are having drastic impacts on our democracy. We live in a moment when we have a billionaire heiress as Secretary of Education who believes in assaulting teacher labor unions and cutting back funding for public education. What kind of society spawns hundreds of CEOs' salaries in the tens and hundreds of millions of dollars, and I see now there's one in the billions, while public school teachers, true keepers of democracy, have to strike for weeks in West Virginia, Oklahoma, Arizona, Kentucky, North Carolina, California, to name a few, in order to keep above the poverty level and have health benefits. A society that does not take care of its teachers does not take care of its democracy, and it is not looking at a promising future. We who have been the beneficiaries of extraordinary liberal arts education need to keep figuring out how to redress this crisis and use our skills and careers to create a better democracy. The learning that happens here at DE then and now is vital, and I hear Rodney DeJournay and his hope for this group of very talented students. We may be 50 years from our 18-year-old selves, but our capacity to be witnessing citizens, to stand up and speak out is imperative. With this in mind, let me recall junior year American history with Steve Waters. Mr. Waters asked us to think about American history through the lens of social problems and institutions, as issues to be confronted and assessed. Critical thinking in liberal arts education was then and remains the cornerstone of an ethical society. Dwight-Englewood and ESB, thank you for this honor. Thank you for bringing us together after many, many years. And thank you for what you did for us, which remains our foundation for knowledge and self-knowledge.